The month of May was a strong month for the jobs market. The economy added 280,000 private sector jobs last month. The unemployment rate remained unchanged from April at 5.5%. Now, the country has now seen 63 consecutive months of private sector job growth. The chart is impressive. More than 12 million jobs have been created over that time period. While more Americans are getting back to work, Congress is still trying to figure out a budget. The budget and discretionary spending is really the next big fight. Paul Ryan and Patty Murray's mini-budget deal is set to expire soon. It was a 2-year deal. Congress agrees on one thing: sequestration is no way to run the railroad, no way to run the budget. They need to realize some of the spending needs to go to infrastructure. In this country, right now, there are thousands of bridges, roads, and dams that are structurally deficient. One example to look back on is the deadly 2007 collapse of the Interstate 35W bridge in downtown Minneapolis. 13 people were killed and 145 others were injured. And Congress made promises but failed to act. I spoke with R.T. Ryback, former mayor of Minneapolis, to discuss his perspective on the lack of investment in infrastructure.
Every political leader in both parties came here and gave us some very comforting assurance that they would do what it takes to make sure this never happened again, that we would actually take care of infrastructure in this country. So we were really blessed then, and frankly, to hear that we're still in this debate is pretty incredibly disheartening.
Former Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell joins us tonight here on the Ed Show. Governor, always a pleasure. Good to have you with us. You have dealt with state, you bet, you have dealt with state budgets, and you know that states can't do this alone. There has to be some federal money here. But this seems, Governor, to be the issue that just gets kicked the can down the road time and time again. What's the conclusion here in the middle of this budget fight that we're about to see in Washington?
Well, you know, normally people ascribe deadlock in Washington to partisanship. This is not the case. Ideology is not really playing a factor here. As you know, Ed, infrastructure traditionally has been a Republican issue. Jim Inhofe, maybe the most conservative man in the Senate, said to me when I was testifying in front of him, Governor, he said, infrastructure is the second most important thing we can spend money on behind defense. So what it is pure, unadulterated cowardice. Everyone's afraid to raise their hand and vote for a gas tax increase, despite the fact that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO, two groups that could barely agree to today's Friday, are for it, despite the fact that more and more Americans are beginning to favor it, despite the fact that when I talk to groups, Ed, I always ask them a question. How many people here know what the federal gas tax is per gallon? Less than 1% of the audience raises their hands. It's 18.7 cents, which proved that it's easy to raise the gas tax. In Pennsylvania, with Governor Corbett, a Republican, in his last year, I went up and stood with him in the halls of the legislature, and we endorsed a transportation plan which would raise the Pennsylvania gas tax by 28 cents over 5 years. It passed just barely. Every legislator who voted for it got reelected 4 months later, every single one.
And you know, and that being the backdrop, Governor, as it stands right now, every politician in this election cycle coming up is going to talk about infrastructure, but there is no major plan to even vote on right now. It's just a bunch of rhetoric and conversation surrounding every campaign. So how do we change that?
Well, we've got to make it a real issue. People have got to, and I think the Chamber could be the one that could make a difference here. The Chamber has endorsed a gas tax increase, but it doesn't put much of its political muscle behind it. The AFL-CIO has done a good job trying to put muscle behind it, but we need the public to get involved and say, look, we don't like to raise taxes. We don't like to see increased spending, but this is investment in our future, and it's investment in our safety. It's investment in our economic competitiveness. And by the way, as you know, Ed, every $1 billion in infrastructure spending produces 25,000 well-paying jobs. The one thing we hear, in addition to infrastructure in Washington, is we all want to create well-paying jobs. Well, these are jobs in factories, steel, asphalt, concrete, and on construction sites that pay $55,000, $65,000, $75,000, $85,000 a year, family-sustaining wages. let's get busy and let's put together a long-term infrastructure revitalization program. Every one of the G20 nations has done it except America. We haven't had a real infrastructure plan since Dwight David Eisenhower decided we needed to build a highway system for the country.
That highway system is not keeping up with the growth that this country is seeing right now. And I think the fact that we got 63 months of private sector job growth kind of simmers the conversation about infrastructure. It'll be interesting to see how all the candidates play it up coming up in this election cycle. It is crucial. But my question tonight is, how many more bridges have to fall down and people die before we realize as a nation we are crumbling? Governor Ed Rendell, always a pleasure. Great to have you with us tonight. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much, sir.
My pleasure.